right, guys, we are going to get started with the retouching process, and what you see here is that I have downloaded all of the images from today's 2 test shoots to Adobe Bridge. From here, I will go through the culling process, and then I will open the images in ACR, which is Adobe Camera Raw, and then I will make my final retouching in Photoshop 6. I use Creative Cloud, and so I always have the most up-to-date versions of both Adobe Bridge and Adobe Photoshop on my computer and my laptop. The first thing that I do when I get started, when I have downloaded all of my images, is that I go through and I give the images that I'm going to edit a rating. So the images are either going to get a rating of 1 or they're going to receive no rating at all. The reason that I do that is that way I have a good idea of how many images I have in the gallery to edit. And also, it's a good idea to go through and do that, especially when you're first starting out in your newborn sessions, just to make sure you have enough images in your client's gallery. All of my images are labeled as SCP, and then I just number them chronologically. When I save the images, I keep it as that number. I don't then go ahead and renumber it. And the reason for that is that if I ever, let's say if I edit this one and it's in the client's gallery, if I need to go back and make, for whatever reason, make any adjustments to it and I need to see the raw file, keeping it the same number will be helpful for that reason. So I'm going to just go through and I am going to start looking at the images, and since I want to go ahead and edit this one, I will give it a rating of 1, which is Control or Command 1. You can also go up to Label and give it a rating like that as well. Now, what I am looking for when I'm going through and giving these images rating is that I am looking for, obviously, images that are tack sharp, that have good composition, and then also have some variety. So if you look at these 2 images I have first rated, you'll see one is more of a straight-on shot, and then this one is at a bit of an angle. So the images that it produces is very different, which is why I want to definitely edit both of those. Definitely want to do a close-up shot. We have a little grin, and we know moms love that one, so we'll edit that one. We love the hands on the cheek, so we'll go ahead and do that one as well. So rather than go through and give ratings to all of the entire gallery for both of these test models, I am going to for time purposes, just go ahead and just show you one batch at a time. I do edit all of the images in the same setup at one time. So for example, I'm going to take all of the images on this white blanket, and I'm going to download all of those images into ACR, make all of the adjustments that way, and I'll sync all the images so they all look the same, and then take all of those images into Photoshop and make all of my final adjustments there. When those are all saved and complete, I'm then gonna go to the next setup. So then I'll jump down and do all of the images of the baby in this basket. By doing this, you can really cut down on your editing time. I know when I first started editing, newborn sessions would really take me, 2-3 hours just to edit one gallery of, 20 to 25 images, which is just absurd. So by this process, I have found that I can really cut down my editing to be, for each gallery around 45 to 60 minutes. So it gives me a lot more time to do the things I really enjoy, like shooting. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight all of the images that I have given a rating of 1. I'm going to right-click that, and I'm going to click Open in Adobe Camera Raw. The great thing about Adobe Camera Raw, for those of you that might be more familiar with editing in Lightroom, is that it's really, really similar. So you'll see on this right side, you have all of these sliders to work with, lots of different categories that we're going to go through and look at what they do, and which ones to use to really make, perfect this shot. And the great thing about going in Camera Raw before you get to Photoshop is that whatever adjustments I make on this one image, I'm going to then go through and using the sync button here, I'm going to sync all of the images so that they all look like they're edited in the same style and they were shot by the same photographer, and it really gives your gallery a really nice flow to it. So I'm going to start with my first image here. And I am going to first look at these sliders down here. So one thing you want to do is you want to bump up your contrast. When I was first learning about what the sliders did, I definitely, would play around. I'd go super dramatic, and then I'd pull it back the other way. And what I found just through tons of trials is that the numbers that I use really, really work well for all of my newborn shoots. So I usually bump my contrast up to between 25 and 30. I bring my highlights down just in case anything is blown out. And then when we use our adjustment brush, which is up here, we'll go through and see if we need to bring back anything. But just for the overall image, I'm going to just bring the highlights down. I'm going to bump the shadows up to between 10 and 15. Bring my whites up just a bit, around 5 or 6. And then I'm going to bump up my clarity to around 7 or 8. You really don't want to go too extreme with bumping up the clarity. If you do, things don't really get more clear. They get just very dark. And you don't really want to lose the detailing. If you've taken a sharp image, based on your right settings in the camera, you shouldn't really have to make too many adjustments to get your image to look more clear and more sharp. We're going to come back to temperature after we make some other adjustments. And so the next thing I do is go into this detail button, and I'm going to go ahead and reduce some of the noise that is present in the image and sharpen it just a little bit more. So to do this, I'm going to bring my sharpening slider up to about 90, and I'm going to bring the radius to about 2. I am then going to bump my luminous to around 20. Which will then go ahead and bump my luminous detail to around 50. The next thing that I want to do is go over to lens corrections. There is sort of this natural vignetting that occurs, and while we might want to throw that back into some of the images, for most of them, particularly the ones on the backdrop, I like to completely get rid of it. So for lens vignetting, I'm going to bump it up to around 30. And if you go to this preview button, you can see how it's gotten rid of those dark edges, which I think just creates a little bit cleaner of an image. And then I'm going to go back to this HSL grayscale. You don't really want to mess with the hue at all because you don't want to throw in other colors or mess with the colors that are already in your image. But what you do want to do is go in, we're going to play around with the saturation sliders as well as the luminous. So for the saturation sliders, what we want to do is we want to throw in a little bit more red and orange, which is really the colors that are, what the baby skin tone is made of. And then by doing that, I'm going to go into luminance and I'm going to bump this up. So let's take a step back just for a second. So for my saturation for reds, I'm going to bump it up to around 15. And for my oranges, I'm going to bump it up to around 7. And then for my luminous, I'm going to then bump up my reds to around 30 and my oranges to around 10 or 12. And what that did is that already starts brightening up baby's skin. It helps to smooth it out. And so it really makes baby and your whole image just look a lot prettier. One other thing that I want to do in saturation is that you want to decrease your blues. So I really bring my blues to around -8 and -10. And the reasoning behind that is that you really, really don't want to pull many cool tones when shooting a baby or when producing the final image. Babies should look like they're, full of color, that they should have a little of those pinky and warm tones. And so if you have an image that has a lot of blues, the baby's gonna the skin is not gonna look as healthy. So that's why I bring down the blue slider, again, to around -8, -10. So if we look at the preview of that again, you'll see we've just kind of brightened up baby skin tones, knocked out a little bit of that cool colors. And then the last thing that we're going to do here is I'm going to go back to my original, my basic sliders, and I'm going to play around with the temperature. I like to bring in a little bit more pinks. This is definitely going to depend on the blanket that you're shooting on and the baby's skin coloring. And you can also warm up the image just a little bit. So right now, for my temperature slider, I'm around 5,800, and then for my tint slider, I'm at 13. And then finally, I'm going to go into the split toning, and I'm going to play around with the highlights. So for my hue, I'm going to bring this slider up to around 35. And then for the saturation, for this image, I'm going to bring it up to around 5. So if you see what I've done here, this has kind of warmed baby up a little bit more. And then I am going to go back here, and here is my image. And this is what we started with. So you see we've given baby a little bit more color, we've smoothed her out a little bit, we've increased the contrast, and we've gotten rid of those darker edges around the background. The last thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you the adjustment brush, which is up here. So one thing that I like to do is really smooth out the background behind the baby. So by taking a new adjustment brush, I will go ahead and decrease the clarity to around -60 and decrease the sharpness to around -60 as well. I'm then going to go ahead and just brush this over the image. Now obviously you can see that I'm drawing over the baby, but that's just to make sure I'm covering all of the background. Then what you want to do now is then go to use your erase feature, and you need to make sure that you have not painted on the baby. So I'm going to just erase the baby, because we will go ahead and skin baby's baby's skin tone in Photoshop. We don't want to do that with this slider. So we've smoothed the background a little bit. The last thing I can see here is that there's this kind of dark shadow on this side, and so I'm going to take another new adjustment brush. I'm going to put the clarity and sharpness back to 0, and I'm going to just bump up the exposure just a little bit, decrease my brush size, and then I'm going to just paint on here near baby's eyes. And the great thing about the slider is that now that I've painted on, I can go ahead and increase it even more, just so you can kind of see what's happening. So if you look at the before and after, you can see baby's eye was a little bit dark there, but by using that one adjustment brush, we've just gone and brought in some of the lightness. So once I've edited this image from start to finish, the great thing is that the hard part is done. I can now go ahead and, selecting this image, I can hold on the shift button and go ahead and highlight all of the other images against this white background, and I'm going to click sync. So what pops up is that I'm going to sync every feature that I just adjusted. The white balance, the exposure, the contrast, and so forth. What you want to make sure is not clicked is the crop, the spot removal, and then those local adjustments. The local adjustments is when we went ahead and smoothed out the background and brought in a little bit of light to her face. Obviously, baby is going to be in a different position for each of your images, and so if you have that clicked, it's going to do those same adjustments on the same image, which will not obviously coincide with where baby's face was. I'm going to click OK, and what you can start seeing happening over here on the left side is that each of these images are going to look with the same exact adjustments as the one that we just did. And that really saves you just a ton of time. So you can produce all these high quality images in such a shorter period of time than by loading each one of your images into Photoshop and making all those adjustments that we just did. Now, even though we have gone ahead and synced all these images together, it doesn't mean that you want to just open all your images up right away. You definitely need to go through now and make sure that the colors, the exposure, everything else looks okay. So I just go through and I'm looking to make sure the exposure looks okay, and I'm making sure the crop looks okay. So here, for example, I definitely want to crop out some of this background, so I'm going to select my crop tool right here. And just crop this a little bit more around baby's face. By double-clicking, it'll crop it. Here's another example where baby's face is a little bit dark, and so I'm going to grab my adjustment brush. You'll see here that the exposure is already bumped up to 0.35 from your last adjustment that you made. And I'm going to just go ahead and bring this on baby's face to lighten that up quite a bit. The other thing I might do here is that you see baby's hand right here. It looks a little bit blown out. So all you can do is just select a new adjustment brush, bring your exposure back down to 0, and then I can decrease the highlights and then just paint that back on. Bring a little bit into her stomach here and this arm. Maybe decrease it a little bit more and maybe give it, knock the exposure down just a bit. So that brought back in some of that detailing that we had lost. You can see this is the before and that's the after. So I'm going to go through and look at the rest of the images. Same thing here, it's a little bit blown out, so I can go ahead and bring the same adjustment brush, pull some of those highlights back. And then here, where we're a little bit darker, I can go ahead and just bring my exposure up. And paint on the baby's face to brighten her up a little bit more. For this image, looks like baby got a little bit bright here, so I'll go back to my basic sliders and bump that exposure down just a little bit. And then I'm going to make one crop here. And that image looks great. So now that I have all of the adjustments done using Adobe Camera Raw, now what I'm ready to do is select all of my images and I'm going to bring them all into Photoshop and make the final adjustments that I need to. And then I'll save the images and they'll be ready for upload to the client's gallery. So I have all of them selected and I'm going to just click here on Open Images and this will open all the images into Photoshop. Okay, so now that all of the images are loaded into Photoshop, what I'm going to start doing is making my individual adjustments to baby for each image. So starting with this image right here, the first thing that you want to do is go ahead and look at baby's face and see if there's any things going on with the skin that you want to take care of. I don't really get rid of all the skin flakes if it's on baby's body, just because I really like to kind of capture baby exactly how they are. But if there's some little skin flakes or imperfections on baby's face, I do take care of those. So what I'm going to do is go over here and I'm going to use my spot healing brush tool. And the great thing about this is that all you have to do is just click on the baby's skin where the little flake is and it will disappear. So you can see I'm going to go through and do this to all of these little bitty pieces. Okay, the next thing so you can see baby skin looks a lot better there. The next thing that you want to do is go ahead and smooth baby skin just a little bit. I definitely don't like the look of baby skin that is so overprocessed and that is so smoothed out, just because I don't think it looks real at all. But I do smooth it a little bit. So I use Coffee Shop Powder Room 2's Free Action, and I'm going to go ahead and run that. The two features that I use here is the soft skin and then the eye define. So I am on the soft skin, and you're going to go on this layer here. You need to select your brush, and you're going to paint on the white because the layer is blacked out. And you want to go ahead and select a soft brush. So if I go up here, I choose a brush where the hardness is 0%. And using my tablet, which makes it super easy, all I'm going to do is just draw over baby's skin. You can always erase if you make any mistakes, and we're also not going to keep it at this 100% opacity. But we'll take a look at what it looks like if we do have it at the 100% opacity. So I've colored all over baby's skin. One thing you want to be careful of is that you don't want to color over any of these creases here. You don't want to color over baby's lips or baby's eyes, because you're going to really lose all that great detailing. I'm going to then go to eye define. And what I define is I define baby's eyes a bit, baby's lips, sometimes a little bit of baby's nose. And again, that was also using that soft brush. I'm then go over here. I'm going to let you just see. So that was the before, and that's the after. So you can see we just made baby's skin look so much smoother. We got rid of all those little bit of imperfections. I think that looks too much based on my own personal preference. So I really drag this opacity down to around 50 or 60%. I think that looks a lot more natural. And same with the eye define. I'm going to bring that down to around 50 or 60%. I'm going to then go ahead and flatten my image. And I'm ready for the next step. Now there's a few things that we want to address in this image. We have this little bit of shading going around here that we want to fix. And then we're going to also add in some matte and haze. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate a layer, which I've done using Control or Command J. I'm going to get the clone stamp tool, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to select a piece of the blanket that looks fine and smooth, and this was just one little bit of wrinkle that we didn't get flattened out when we were shooting. And so I'm going to just cover that up with my clone stamp tool. Super easy, and if I look at the before, we've just gone ahead and gotten rid of it. I see one more little wrinkle here. So again, I'm going to just select part of the blanket that is not wrinkled and cover up. Now, if you accidentally go over baby like that, all you have to do then is create a mask here and select your brush, and then you can just color over the part that you did not want. To be colored over. So here's the before, and here's the after we've gotten rid of those wrinkles. I'm going to then go ahead and flatten the image, and I'm going to do a couple of things. The first thing I want to do is kind of just lift up some of these shadows And so I'm going to grab, and you really just brighten up the whole overall image. So I'm going to grab a curves layer, and I'm going to go directly in the center, and I'm going to just pull it up a little bit. So if we look at the before and after, we've kind of just lifted the shadows a little bit, and we've brightened up the whole image. I'm going to flatten that. And then the final thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of matte into the image, and then I'm going to run my SCP Hello Haze action. To bring the matte, I'm going to bring up another curves layer, and I'm going to go to this bottom corner right here, the bottom left corner, and I'm going to raise that up a little bit and then pull down in the center. So if I go to the before and after, we've just did a slight hint of the matte look. And then I'm going to go to my SCP Hello Haze action, and I'm going to run that, and that runs just a little bit of haze on the image, which gives a little bit of the vintage look, but still keeps it a really, really clean image. I'm going to bring the opacity for that down to 50. Whatever you want to do, that's a personal preference. And then I'm going to flatten the image. So here, I think the image is perfect. I'm going to go ahead and save it. I'm going to go ahead and save it as a JPEG. And so you can see that the image was previously named SCP_0171. I want to keep those same numbers in it as we talked about before in case I need to reference that later. So I'm going to name it just SCP-171. And I'll click Save. I always save it with the highest quality. And the great thing is that now I'm going to do the exact same thing I did with that image to every other image in this gallery. The exact same steps. So let's look at one other image and do the exact same thing before we move on. Let's go ahead and do this one. So again, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of the little flakes going on in baby's skin. I'm going to grab my spot healing tool. And I'm going to draw over the little bits of flakes. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to run the Coffee Shop Powder Room 2 action. So I'm going to select a soft brush, and I'm first going to smooth baby's skin out. If you don't have a tablet, you can definitely do this with your mouse. I just think the tablet gives you the ability to really just draw on it like you would, color in a picture. So you have a little bit more control than you do if you're just doing it with a mouse. So I've smoothed baby's skin. I'm going to define the eyes. Define the nose and the lips, and then I'm going to pull back the opacity for those to around 50 to 60%. So again, you can see there's baby's skin smoothed out. The background looks really good, again, except for this little bit of wrinkle going on here. So I'm going to duplicate a layer right there. I'm going to grab the clone stamp tool, pull from a piece of fabric that is not wrinkled, and cover up that other piece. Check the before and after just to make sure it's all covered up. Flatten that. I'm going to grab my curves layer. I'm going to first brighten everything up a bit. Maybe pull that back just a little bit. Grab another curves layer to create a little bit of the matte effect. Bring your slider in the bottom left corner up. Bring the one in the middle down. And then finally, I'm going to just run the SCP Hello Haze to get a little bit hazy look. Rename my file using the numbers that I had it in the raw file, and then save it as a JPEG. So that same process would be done to every image against this white background, and then I'm going to go back into my Adobe Bridge, and I'm going to look at the next setup. All right, guys, so I have finished editing all of the images that I wanted to against the white backdrop, and so I will then come back into my Adobe Bridge, and I'm going to go on to the next section. So for this shoot, we then moved over to the baby in the basket against the wood. So let's go through here and give some of these images a rating. So let's give that a rating because that one looks good. This is a little bit different angle, and so I would give that a rating. We definitely want to do a close-up, and then I like this side shot. The great thing is that once you've set your sliders for one of these images on a previous setup, you can really sync the two images together on your new setup, like with the baby in the basket. Obviously, you'll have to make some changes based on what the light was doing, but it'll save, again, more of that time post-processing. So I will select these 4 images that I just gave a rating of 1 to. I'm also going to select that first image that we processed. So I'll open all 4 of these in Camera Raw. I'm going to then go ahead and highlight the new image, and I'm going to sync it. So again, everything is going to be checked except for the last 3 options, the crop, the spot removal, and the local adjustments, and I'm going to click OK. And then when I open this image, I can definitely see that I'm going to have to work a little bit with the temperature, but actually the exposure and everything else looks great. If I look at the preview of what the image was before, you can see what a really tremendous change it made. Just only modifying things in this Camera Raw. So one thing that I want to do is I do want to go ahead and crop this image just a little bit. So over here, we definitely see that we have the wood didn't extend to the full image, but using some features in Photoshop, we can definitely bring that back in. So I'm not worrying about that at all. For the wood background, if I go to the adjustments, it's not really something that I want to smooth out just because I like the texture and how everything looks for a setup like this. For the backdrops, I definitely like to smooth it out, and I'll use, by decreasing the clarity and the sharpness, I'll definitely use an adjustment brush for this. But against the wood, I really don't. The one thing I do want to look at is if we go back to these sliders and we go to the split toning, this might be an example where I'm going to bring my saturation levels up just a little bit more. We couldn't pull these up too high when we were against the white backdrop, or it would just pull too many warm tones. But this gives some really pretty colors. I think baby looks a little bit too warm here, so I'm going to bring my temperature slider down just a little bit. And then I also noticed that the wood looks to be pulling a little bit of greens, and so I'm going to bring my tint up even a bit more. And again, if we go to the before and after, here's my before and here's my after. Now, one thing, if you can remember on the white backdrop, we definitely we pulled a lot of the blues there. So if I go back to the saturation, babies that are on those white blankets, they definitely can pull the blues more. So if I want to go ahead and go to my saturation and pull the blues down to just about -5 versus -10, I feel comfortable doing that because baby still looks warm enough in this image. So all looks good there. You can see that everything else transferred over, my sharpening, my noise reduction, the lens vignetting, and so forth. And then I'm going to go ahead and sync the other images against this setup. I'm going to then go through and just check to make sure the images are how I want them. You can see in this image here, baby's head is really close to the top of the image, and baby's arm, there's a little bit of room here on the bottom. The crop should look deliberate in my opinion, so I'm going to just go ahead and crop this a little bit tighter so the image looks like we actually meant to crop it. And so now really the focus is on baby's sweet face and her arms, tucked under her chin. Again, I'm going to adjust this crop just a little bit. And we are all set there. So I'm going to go ahead and I would then go ahead and select all of my images and open them all up into Photoshop. Since I'm operating a laptop and it takes quite a bit of time to do that, I'm actually going to just go ahead and pull one in, just because the adjustments that I make on one of these images will obviously be the same that I make for each of the images in this setup. So let's go ahead and open this image into Photoshop and make our final adjustments. Okay, so here's our image, and again, the first thing I'm going to do is look at baby's skin and get rid of any of those little imperfections that kind of detract from the image. One thing you'll notice here is that there's this little bit of red spot on baby's cheek. And if I use this spot healing brush tool, you're going to have to go a lot whiter. I'm going to just show you. I have a layer duplicated. And it got rid of it, but it also pulled some of these dark edges around into that, and I don't think that that looks great on baby's skin. So let me show you another way to do that. So I'm going to just delete that layer. I'm going to duplicate a layer, and I am going to do the patch tool. The patch tool allows you to take the piece of skin that has the imperfection and move it over to part of the skin that we would rather see. So all I'm going to do is go ahead and highlight this little patch where baby's skin is a little bit red, and I'm going to just pull it onto baby's skin that is not so red. And what you can see here is that that got rid of that little imperfection there, but it really just brought the good part of baby's skin in its place. And we're going to also go through and smooth the skin when we use the powder room action. And so you won't even know that there's anything different there. So I'll flatten that image, and I'm going to first run the powder room tool. I'm going to go to the soft skin and select a soft brush again and paint over baby's skin. Again, I'm avoiding the eyes, the eyebrows, all of the little parts of the baby that you really don't want to lose any of the detail. And then I'm going to go to the eye define and define over the eyes and the baby's nose and lips. And then I'll pull both those back to around 50 or 60%. There's a before and after, and then I can go ahead and flatten that. Next thing we want to do is address these edges where the wood did not exist. And so I'm going to go ahead again and make a duplicate layer. The reason I'm doing that versus editing directly in my background is that if I make any mistakes, I can just go ahead and throw the layer away and not have to dump the entire image that I've already made the adjustments on. So I am going to take my clone stamp tool, and all I have to do is go ahead and take this piece of wood, hold down the Alt button, and then just drag it over the part of the image where we need wood to be there. Again, if you look at the before and after, it looks like that piece of wood is just naturally extended. And then I'm going to do the same thing over here. And then I'll go ahead and flatten the image. I'm going to go ahead and grab a curves layer, bump it up just a little bit. I am going to grab another curves layer to add in a little bit of matte. Let's go a little bit more dramatic on this one. And then run a little bit of haze. And we are done. We'll go ahead and save it. And then get back into Bridge. Okay, let's look at one of these images on yellow. Again, we would have already gone through and given all of these images on yellow the rating. So I'll go ahead and take the one that I'm going to edit, open it up with a previous image that I've already made the adjustments on. I'm going to go ahead and sync the two images together first. And then I'm going to make my other adjustments. So again, just like that setup on the wood, I can go into the split toning and I can bring up that saturation just a little bit. I'm also going to bump up my tint just a little to put a little bit more reds in there versus the greens that it may be pulling. I see a little bit of this baby's leg that's a little bit blown out, so I'm going to grab an adjustment brush. Bump down the highlights and bring some of that back in. And then the last thing that I'll do is I will grab a new adjustment brush, and we want to just go ahead and smooth out that background a little bit more. So decreasing my clarity and saturation, or my sharpness. And running that all over the background, and then again making sure that we then erase baby. We would then go ahead and do that with every image on yellow, and then open that up in Photoshop. Okay, so here's the baby on the yellow blanket. And the first thing that I'll do is grab my spot healing brush tool, and I'm going to go ahead and make those adjustments. Getting rid of all that little baby flaky skin on her face. We have that little bit of a red patch again, so then I will again use my patch tool here. and drag it to the piece of the skin on baby's face that looks okay. Okay, and then we will go ahead and run the powder room tool. I'm going to use my soft brush to do baby skin. And then define baby's eyes, nose, and mouth. Pull back the opacity on that. Bump the curves up just a bit. And then throw in a little bit of matte. And a little bit of haze, and there's our final image. So the great thing about this editing process is that the same process is really used for every single images, and that's what really cuts down the time here. So what I want to do is, before we jump ahead to the second model of the day, let's go ahead and look at the chin-up pose and see how we are going to blend both those images together to create one of the images for the composite. So if I'm looking at these two images here, we have the images where mom's hand was on the wrist, baby's wrists, and then we have the images where mom's hand was on baby's head. So what we're doing is we're really looking at for the images where you shot it from the same position. So I am gonna star these two images. And these are the two images that I will then pull into ACR and then into Photoshop to edit them. I'll go ahead and pull in an image that I've already edited because we know those sliders are set correctly. I'm going to start by syncing everything. I'm going to go ahead and bump the exposure down just a little bit, just because I think it gets a little bit bright over here. And then once I have that set, we can go ahead and sync these two images together. Now, because we're going to be blending this image and the image right under it together, you don't really want to make any local adjustments here in ACR, because you don't want to have any spots where it is corrected in one image and not corrected to the same degree on the other image. So we're going to save any adjustments that we have to make when we need to open those into Photoshop. So I'm going to go ahead and grab these two images and open them up. Okay, now that we have both these images opened up in Photoshop, the plan here is that we want to take the image where mom's is holding baby's head, and we are going to first just drop this image using your move tool onto the other image. And then I can close that one out because we're done using it. So you can see here is the image with mom's hand on the baby's head, and here's the image with mom's hand on the baby's wrists. Okay, the next thing that we want to do is we want to go over here on our right side, and it's currently set to normal. What we want to do is that temporarily we're going to go ahead and set this to difference. The reason that we're doing that is because this feature allows us to line up the baby and the baby's hat before we mask away the part that we don't want. So one thing that I can look at are, certain points in my image. So the heart is a great piece to look at because it'll help us line it up. And then the brim of the hat is another place that we want to look at. So one thing I notice is that in my bottom image, the baby is turned a little bit more. So what I need to do is I need to grab this top image and turn it. So I'm going to use my Control or Command T feature, which grabs the top image because that's the image that's highlighted over here. I can then do two things. I can go to the bottom right or the top right corner and I can increase and decrease the size. And I can also, if you look here, I can also rotate the image. So I'm going to rotate to the image until I see that the brim of the hat is lining up a lot better. And you can see also right in this area that the heart is starting to match up perfectly. So once that's lined up, I'm going to go ahead and apply the transformation. I'm going to then go back to the normal now, and I'll see the top image is now what we see here. Now, don't worry that baby's on an angle, because after we mask off the part of the baby that we don't want, we can then go back and rotate the baby so that she's not slanted like that. So what we want to do is we want to bring on a layer here. And the point of this layer is that we want to then go ahead and mask off mom's hand. We want this part of the image where baby is on her chin, but we want to make it look like she's obviously doing it by herself. So I'm going to select a soft brush. Since my layer mask is white, I'm going to just choose a black brush, and which means I'm going to paint over the part that we don't want. So here I am going to just start drawing over mom's arm, mom's hand, and then the hat. And what you'll notice is that since we used that difference feature, everything is lining up just like we saw it when we had the difference feature set. So you can see if here's our before image, and here we've gone ahead and put the new layer on, and baby's hat looks like it's the same hat that was on the previous image. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do a couple of things. I am going to go ahead and flatten the image, and we need to then go ahead and grab the whole image and rotate it so that baby doesn't look like she's slanted there. So I've used the Command T or Control T. And I'm going to go ahead and turn baby so that it's a straight on shot. Apply the transformation. And then I'm going to use my crop tools to then crop in, because there's a lot of background here. So if you look up here to style, you'll see that I have my fixed ratio set to 6:4. Just so it has that same crop as the one that we take it in. For these images, I really do like to keep baby right in the center. And then I'm going to go ahead and make all the same adjustments that I do on those other images. So again, I'm going to run powder room. I will smooth baby's skin. Define baby's eyes and nose and mouth. Bump up my curves a little bit, bring in some matte. And then run a little bit of haze. And there's your final image. The thing about this, editing that, is that I mean, just know that it does get easier as you practice and practice it more. It's easier to do it with a hat because it's easier when you go into the feature where you're using the difference. It's easier to line up the brim of the hat versus the baby's hairline. But as you get more comfortable with this, then you can start playing around with just doing it with bare heads. So I would save the image and then go back over to your bridge, and we will start on editing our second model of the day. Okay, so we are going to move on and edit some of our second model of the day. This little guy. So we can definitely use some of the same settings that we did for our first baby girl. The one thing to note is that obviously baby's skin tones, baby's skin coloring, no baby is obviously going to be the same. And so just like when we moved this first baby around to different setups and we had to adjust some of the temperature, we'll have to do that with, really with each baby that you have. Other than that, you know that the other sliders are really going to stay very consistent for each setup. So I would go ahead and start with this little guy on the brown, and we would go through and again give ratings. Definitely do one of the close-ups, one of the whole body. Again, these two are really different angles, and so I would do both of those. Okay, once we have given all of those ratings against the whole brown, I would then go ahead and pull all of them into Adobe Camera Raw again. Let's just look at these first three images. We'll grab one of the images that we've already edited from the first shoot and open these all in Camera Raw. So if I select the first two images and go ahead and sync them. Okay, so what I'm looking at here is that the temperature is a little bit off, mainly because baby looks a little bit red, and he did have a little bit more pinkish skin, but we don't want to pull too much of those reds into it, and I definitely look a little bit bright on this side. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just knock my exposure down a little bit. I'm then going to go ahead and bring my temperature down just a little bit. I was around 5,800. I'm going to bring it down to around 5,500, which makes him look not quite so orange. And then I'm going to bring the tint down just a little bit to around 14. So you can see that really helps. I still am not pulling any of the greens, but it took out a lot of the reds that we had previously seen. The other thing that I'm going to do is his skin, his face over here looks a little bit dark, so I'm going to use my adjustment brush. And I will go ahead and butt my exposure up a little bit and paint that on his face over here. And then I will select a new adjustment brush and bump down the clarity and the sharpness. And then paint that on the backdrop, just to smooth things out a little bit more. I'm going to go ahead and erase baby. And so let's take a look at our before and after. This was the straight out of the camera shot. And then you can see very quickly what we've done to really enhance the image, to enhance all of baby's features. And then we can go ahead and sync everything else. One of the great things about editing this way is that editing does not become something that is looked upon as just such a, long task. Being able to apply these same features every time just drastically reduces the amount of time you have to spend behind the computer. So I'm going to look over both of the images. Everything looks good. And then I would go ahead and select all of the images and pull everything into Photoshop. So let's take a look at this top image and bring that in. Okay, so we are ready to make our final adjustments in Photoshop. One thing to note here is that this baby really had just really smooth skin, and so this is definitely a time where I might not even smooth out baby's skin really at all. If I even zoom in a little bit closer, there's barely any imperfections. I might use my spot healing tool to fix a few of those flakes. We can definitely still use the eye define tool in the powder room action. But this is just an example where you're definitely not going to even need to use that soft skin at opacity 60%. It's going to just make his skin look way too over-processed. So when we run this, let's go ahead and brush it on. And then you'll see why really it's just not necessary to keep this opacity even as high as 50 or 60%. Okay, so here is his skin before, and here is it after. This is around 60%, which I still think is just too much because his skin was so smooth to begin with. And so this is an example where if I'm going to run it at all, I'll probably keep it around 20 to 25%. I will still use the eye define, so we can go over his eyes and his nose and his lips, but still run that at about 60%. And then I'll flatten that. I can bump up my curves just a little bit. That's a little bit too much, so I could either delete the layer or I can just bring my opacity down and save myself that step. So that's at about 30%, which I think looks nice. I will go ahead and bring a curves layer in to put a little bit of matte in it. And then run a little bit of haze. And then I would go ahead and just save that image. Okay, let's go back into Bridge, and I want to take a look at some of the images on baby on the rug, just because when you are photographing the rug, there's a few things that you want to do to really make the rug look super smooth, rather than as kind of rugged as it looks here. So I am going to pull, let's take a look at this image here. We'll go ahead and grab the images that we already edited on him. We can go ahead and sync these two images together. Okay, so a few things that we want to note here. First, the rug really pulls a lot of greens. So there's a couple of ways to work around this. One thing that we can do is that we can go into our HSL grayscale, and just like when we were on the white and we pulled down the blues when we were on the white backdrop, we can go ahead and pull some of the greens out in this image. So if I bring that out to -10, that helps a little bit. The other thing that we're going to do is that if we bring our slider up, to around -28, the rug definitely looks a lot nicer, I think, with these pinky tones versus the green tint that it had. But then, of course, baby got really red. So we can go ahead and use a local adjustment to modify that, because I'd rather see the rug, which is such a large part of the image, look really nice and have some of these pinky tones, and then just adjust him separately. So what we're going to do first, because everything else looks good, is that I will go to my local adjustments. I already have my adjustment brush set to where my clarity and sharpness was decreased. So let's go ahead and first smooth out the rug. And right away you can see this gives the rug such a prettier look when we've really smoothed it out like this. We've obviously painted over the whole image, so then let's go ahead and erase that and make sure that baby has not been affected at all. And then we're going to take a new adjustment brush, and one thing that we're going to do is first look at baby. So I'm going to bring my clarities and sharpness back to 0. I'm going to then use my tint, and I'm going to decrease the reds and increase some of the warmth a little bit. And this is what I'm going to then paint on baby. Now remember, the great thing is that we can always adjust this after we've painted on him, but it just gives us a starting point. Might want to increase the exposure for just him a little bit. And if I preview this, you can see that we've gotten rid of some of those pinky tones, and he looks a little bit more natural here. The other thing is that we have some pretty deep shadows in our rug here. So I'm going to just go ahead and take a new adjustment brush, set all of these sliders back to 0. I'm going to bump up the exposure a little bit and also bring up my shadows to around, let's start at 25. And I'm going to rub that in all of these places where they're just created those really dark shadows. Sometimes we really like the shadows to give us a little bit moodier image, but I think in this case it really pulls away from the baby. And so by lightening it up a little bit, it brings the focus back to baby's face, baby's body, and how baby's wrapped up and everything. So I think everything else is good here. Let's go back to the beginning sliders, and if we go to the before and then our after. Okay, and then we'll go ahead and open the image. Okay, so once the image is loaded up, there's just a few things in this image that I want to talk about. A lot of times those little pricks on baby's foot they take when baby is born, I don't adjust those, but since this one had a little cut there, that is something that I would fix. So you can get your spot healing brush tool and click over baby's foot, and you can see how that quickly disappears. And then make any other quick adjustments, these little flakes over here. We can go ahead and run the powder room. So I'm going to smooth baby's skin. Again, this opacity is going to be set just around 25 or so. Define baby's eyes and nose. And then we'll flatten all of that. Bump up our curves. Bring in some matte. And then one thing I want to show you is what I do with this rug. You can bring in the initial haze that I run over the whole layer. But then another thing that's nice is to then run the haze action again and really just haze out some of the rug. And so with our brush, we're going to then go ahead and mask off the baby. And we can bring that opacity down just a bit. But what you see is that just kind of gives it a little bit more soft effect on the rug. And then we would go ahead and save that. Okay, the next thing I want to do is I want to show you how we will edit these macro shots, because I definitely edit them a little bit differently. One thing that we want to do here is just really go ahead and highlight all of the features that we shot. So if we look at baby's hair, if we look at baby's feet, let's go ahead and start here. So if we sync these two images, there's a few things that we're going to do. One thing that we're going to do is we're going to bring up the blacks really to around 70, 75. And then the other thing that we're going to do is we're going to sharpen this even more. So I'm going to bring my sharpening really to around 125 and my radius to around 2.5. And that just helps showcase all these little bitty details, the hair, you know, the different colors in the hair, everything like that. I then want to go ahead and select the feet and sync those two now that we've adjusted one. So here we look a little bit cool and we definitely look a little bit red, which is going to be normal. But I can bring up my temperature. And then I'm also going to bring my tint down just a bit to get rid of some of that red. You definitely don't want to overexpose these images, because if you blow out any areas, you're going to really lose the details. And rather, instead, you really just want to, you know, enhance everything. So we want to, you know, you want to see the fingernails, you want to see the little, the lines in the skin, everything like that. So if we look at a before and after, here's the before image, and here's after, where we can really see every little bitty part of those toes. And then I will bring those two images into Photoshop. Okay, so both of my images are now in Photoshop, and I don't run the powder room action because you don't want to smooth the thing out here. I mean, the point of these images is to really see every little bitty detail. The only thing I'm going to look at is just to make sure, sometimes since, you know, baby is on the rug, you see I have these little bit of flyaways here of the piece of the rug, and since we are looking at such a close-up shot and we want to see all the details, you know, I'm going to just go ahead and take the spot healing brush and get rid of that little piece of fur that got caught in his hair. And then the only thing I do on my macro shots is I just run the haze. And that's it. So those are really easy images to edit, just because we just want to highlight all the great parts of baby, and then we're just going to run a little bit of haze to make it look a little bit vintagey. Same thing here. We have this one little piece of fur that got caught in his toes, so we'll go ahead and use the spot healing touch to take care of that. But everything else I want to keep, and so I will just run a little bit of haze, and again, save the images, and you're done. And the macro shots are just so awesome because you can quickly put, if I go back here to show you all of them, you can quickly put, you know, 9 of them into a big 20 by 20 storyboard. Or you can suggest that parents do, you know, a whole wall of canvases, of small canvases, you know, 9, 10 by 10 canvases. So there's so many great things to do with macro shots, and parents just love seeing the little itty bitty parts of a baby. So they just make a great addition to your gallery. All right, guys, so now that I've edited all of the images in both of the models' galleries, my next step would be that I would go ahead and upload all of the images that I've edited to individual galleries that the parents can then see on my website. Everything, obviously, it is protected with a big copyright symbol and my name, and I would then go ahead and dump all of my raw files into the trash. Now, the only reason that I'm comfortable doing that is that I have already backed them up onto an external hard drive. So I like storing everything on the external hard drive just in case I ever need to go back and reference any of the images, but I don't like obviously keeping it on my computer because there would just be way too much information stored on there. So once I've edited everything I need to from the gallery and the gallery is uploaded to the client's gallery on my website, I then will go ahead and throw away all the raw images and you know, proceed with the ordering part of the process with my client. The editing just takes a bit of practice, and once you kind of start following along with these steps on your own images, you're just going to be amazed at how quick it can become. It shouldn't be such a long and tedious process as it generally starts when you first start shooting newborn sessions. But you're going to see once you kind of throw together this process and really learn it, learn how to use the Adobe Camera Raw, which is such a great feature that many people really don't know about, and then make all of those little fine finishing touches in Photoshop. It really can become an easy process that makes the whole process of shooting, from shooting to retouching, just so much easier. Thanks for sticking around, and I wish you guys the best of luck practicing.